We've all heard of aviation as the safest mode of transportation out there, but what do the statistics really say about general aviation? We're going to talk about that today in the hangar. Hey everyone, Josh here from the YouTube channel Aviation101. I'm here guest hosting this episode of In the Hangar. First things first, this channel is sponsored by several amazing companies, too many to list in fact, so please go down in the description, check them all out. They support this entire production and make all of this content possible to deliver to you and the audience. We're gonna talk about some things today that I think are pretty important. We've got Josh Mintz here. You run a flight school, right?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Here in the Fort Worth area?
Yes, sir. Down at Fort Worth Spinks in Burleson.
Awesome, awesome. And then we have Brian, and you're a longtime CFI, right?
Yeah, I've been a flight instructor for about 38 years, and on the side, I fly airliners for a small airline here in DFW.
Fantastic, fantastic. And then we have Chelsea Smith. You're aspiring to get your CFI. You're working on that right now. And you went through an entire A&P program, and you're actually an IA now.
Yes.
And y'all focused on accident statistics a lot in school, right?
Quite a bit. The bulk of the curriculum was digging into accident statistics, crash analysis, all kinds of stuff like that. So I'm excited to talk about it today because I think it was one of the biggest influences in pilot training, and I think it isn't highlighted and showcased enough. And that we should really be digging into the root causes, especially the human factors. And we can all sit here at 0 knots and think about accidents and think that we would never fall prey to any of those factors or anything that would influence us to make those exact decisions. But the statistics and the realities are we are all influenced and imprinted by the same mistakes.
We are. And I kind of want to start the conversation here with what I normally end my videos on YouTube with. I always say, stay happy, healthy, current, but most importantly, stay proficient. And that gap between currency and proficiency is reflected directly in our fatal accident statistics in general aviation. Rather tragic fatal accident statistics that we have. And we jotted down some stuff last night, just digging on the NTSB website. These are statistics from 2020. So if we're looking at Part 121, the airlines, versus Part 91. In 2020, Part 121, air carrier services had 14 accidents. 0 of them were fatal. 0. Part 91 had 1,085 accidents in 2020, and 205 of those were fatal. That's a little bit over a fatal accident every other day. And that kind of reflects on social media these days of what I'm seeing. That increases our communication. We're able to be more aware of what's going on in the world around us. And gosh, it seems like every freaking day we're hearing about another fatal accident. And it's heartbreaking, especially when, it's close to home. It's at your home airport, or it's,
right.
A plane that you've flown before or something like that.
A friend.
It can happen to any of us, a friend.
Yeah, that's true, and I have to agree with the word proficiency, and again, you're talking about how we can, right here with the 0 knots, I like to teach my students that when I'm teaching a class or teaching students or airline pilots or private pilots alike, whatever, that, okay, you're tired. You've only slept 2 hours last night. Should you take this flight? And everybody in the hangar or in the classroom says, oh, no, I shouldn't take that flight. But you put yourself in that situation, and you're going to be compelled to do it. And that's where the problem lies, is that yes, in the classroom we can make a decision that this is not a good idea, so put yourself back in that classroom. And I think pilots should also take, you compare airline versus general aviation, and the problem with GA, one of the problems is, causing those statistics that you mentioned, is that the pilot has a vested interest in getting there. Whereas at the airlines, the pilot does not have a vested interest. They're going to get paid either way. As an airline pilot, I don't care if the person in row 20 doesn't make a wedding tonight.
Right.
But as a GA pilot, I'm flying myself to a wedding. I care if I get there. That's where a lot of the decision making goes awry.
That's it, yeah. And in fact, we made the 5-hour drive up from Galveston up to here last night because I didn't know if the weather was going to be good enough for us to fly back today. And I just did not. I've been there, done that. I don't want to be in a situation where we're like, we've got stuff tomorrow. It's Monday morning. We need to get back. And then we're kind of battling that weather. So I just
get there at us.
Exactly. I didn't even want to put ourselves in that situation.
Right.
Yeah. Josh, you run a flight school. What does recurrent training in general aviation mean to you?
You definitely want to press forward. Once you get your private, you can't just step out and go, oh, I got my private, let's just go start flying across the country. You need to further your education in the aviation community. IFR training would be the first thing I would definitely push students to do. I feel like most of the people that make it through private kind of feel the need for the IFR training, and they do kind of press towards that. Some don't, but they definitely should.
IFR training would make a VFR pilot a better VFR pilot as well.
That's what me and
right.
Jessica were talking
Yeah.
about earlier
Yeah.
outside, yeah. Once you're IFR rated, you're that much more proficient just flying without being in the clouds. Just
Right.
holding a heading and an altitude, going somewhere, doing something. If you're a VFR pilot, you just got your private, you bought a Cirrus, and now you're crossing the country, your green line on FlightAware is probably going to be, like this. Your altitude is going to be up and down. But if you're IFR rated, now it's just going to be a straight shot. Your
Right.
scan techniques are so much better. You're so much more aware of the environment, situational awareness, what's going on around you.
You hold yourself to a tighter standard.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
yeah. So that's kind of the next topic that I want to lead into about recurrent training in general aviation. So what are the standards for us as Part 91 pilots? What are we required to do just as a VFR pilot?
Just a flight review.
Right. And how often does that have to happen?
Every 2 years.
Every 24 calendar months. 1 hour of flight instruction, 1 hour of ground instruction. Every 24 calendar months. I don't know about y'all, but that's a joke.
That's
to
not
me.
proficiency.
That's not proficiency.
No, it's just meeting a bare minimum and checking a box. And, back when I learned to fly, and I'm guessing maybe you, but not you guys, they called it a biennial flight review.
Yep,
So it was
yep.
like you'd get that once every 2 years. And I think a lot of pilots have that in their head. To your point, a private pilot license, is a
license to learn.
A license to
Yeah.
learn. That's what we all keep saying, and we got to really hone that in.
That's the bare minimum. And what I say to pilots a lot of times about the requirement for recurrent training in general aviation, the FAA requires 1 hour of flight, 1 hour of ground instruction every 24 calendar months. That's the minimum requirement. Are you a minimum effort kind of aviator?
Right.
Do you owe it to your passengers to only squeak by with the bare minimum?
I feel like most people that get into becoming a pilot, it's not easy. It's challenging. So we're good at conquering challenges. We're not just going to quit and
Right.
drop the ball and walk off. Most
Yeah.
of us like to kind of further that and increase our ability and knowledge. And
I guess the biggest
hope.
challenge is holding ourselves accountable to continue to set those next goals, the proficiency goals, and sticking with them. Because it's really easy when you don't have the 24 calendar months breathing down your neck, hey, it's time for a flight review, to just be like, oh, I haven't done those maneuvers in a while, but we're going to take off, climb, cruise, descend into this airport. It's just going to be a quick flight today. And so setting those minimums, the same way that we do with instrument flying or anything like that, remains important to carry over in just proficiency training. Whenever I was a newly minted wet ink private pilot, the DPE, as he slid it across the table, and it's an examiner that I really greatly admire, Colonel Bill out of Charleston, West Virginia. It was a pleasure doing a check ride with him, but when he passed that across the table, he said, I want you to go through the ACS, even if you don't do any other rating, and continue to pick something out, steep turns, turns around a point, slow flight, pick one, and instead of just taking off, climb, cruise, descent, go and fly those maneuvers still. Go and get yourself into stall with power on, power off, and really reflect back on why are we doing power on stalls and when do we see those within that same climb, cruise, descent profile within the vicinity of the traffic pattern. Continue to look at the accident statistics and reflect on would I fall prey to these human factors or put yourself in those exact situations. But even if your ambitions are just to get a private pilot ticket and that's a perfect goal,
Cool.
continue on. And I liked the instrument training because it felt like I truly started to dig in and understand the full picture and the full system, whether you use that ticket or not. And it, like you said, it's a really good excuse to continue to push through and stay in that training mentality, training environment, which we should all stay in.
And that's the
whole
flip
time.
side to IFR training is you get so much more comfortable with the system and how it
system,
operates. And it's all there to
exactly.
protect us and keep us alive and safe. So use it. It's there. But
And that's why I was saying they called it a biennial flight review, and they changed it to flight review. And I think part of the reason for that was so that you don't think of it as a once every 2 years thing. It's an ongoing thing. You just get the signature once every 24 months, but you can get it in over the period of several lessons.
Yeah.
The FAA's Wings program is a great way to do that
Yes.
because it
Great
does it over a
resource.
period of time. And I've kind of transitioned to doing that more and more so that we do multiple lessons over a period of time. And when you accomplish a certain level, we go ahead and sign it off.
Yeah.
And it's finished. So yeah, I think that's a better way to do it than just a ground 1 hour flight every 24 calendar months.
Right. Well, and that leads me to kind of the next question. You talked about go out and practice something from the ACS, steep turns about a point, or S turns over a road, whatever it may be. How does that translate to what our flight reviews these days look like?
I was going to say, off of that, usually every time I do a flight review, we get in the airplane, the guy's like, okay, what are we going to work on? I'm like, well, what have you not done in 2 years?
Right.
Steep
What
turns,
scares you?
stall. Yeah, what are you freaked out about?
Yeah.
What do you have questions? What are you unsure about? Let's focus on that. Let's not focus on all the other stuff. Let's focus on where your weak points are, where you're not practicing, you're not fresh on. Let's put a hood on. Let's go shoot some approaches. Let's go do some steep turns or, whatever.
Yeah.
So,
It's really interesting what I've found as not a full-time flight instructor. I've been very part-time with it. But when I have done flight reviews for friends, hangar neighbors, or whatever it is, there was one in particular. I was doing a flight review in a Piper Archer 3 for one of my hangar neighbors. And I failed his engine, I don't know how many times, because he said he hadn't practiced just, all of a sudden having to put the airplane into a glide, pick a place to land. And, we did the whole thing where we get over a private runway and, I chopped the power and then he picked a field instead of the runway, that kind of thing. We talked about that kind of stuff because he hadn't done it in so long.
Right.
And he said it was the most difficult flight review he had ever had. And I was like, wait, really? I didn't feel like we did all that much, but that got me thinking about.
that was his hard part.
Yeah, exactly. And that got me thinking about, well, what is the average flight review? What do people normally train with this type of stuff? So I think when we compare ourselves, Part 91, General Aviation, to the airlines, the Part 121 world, what does our recurrent training schedule and protocol look like compared to theirs? They're training every 6 months.
I was about to say, isn't it every 3? Don't they do something every 3 months too, though?
I could be wrong. Don't quote me on this. I know we have some airline people. Christy, you can nod. 6 months, three months.
Well, I'm one as well, and I can tell you, it used to be 6 months and 9 months. Now it's every year, but we also have a home-based training, and there's a lot of in-between stuff that we have to read. And so it's over a period of time that we do different things.
Spread out throughout the year.
Spread
Okay,
out, but also it's tailored toward your operation.
Right.
It's tailored toward what your company does, where they fly, the kind of operation that you're flying. For example, to push that to general aviation, I once had a pilot who flies his 414, a multi-engine airplane, all over the place all the time. That's his normal thing. Wanted to go rent a 172 and get a flight review from me. Well, what do you think of that? I think, well, that's not your normal operation. We need to be doing multi-engine stuff because that's what you normally fly. So when you say what's on a flight review, 1 hour ground, 1 hour of training in this 172 would renew this pilot for another 2 years to go fly his twin, but that would not have been doing him any favors by doing it that way. So I refused it and I said, let's do what you normally do. Do you normally fly IFR? Yeah, well, let's shoot some approaches.
Yeah.
So you need to tailor it. And that's one thing that we at the airlines get is we get very specific, tailored, for the seasons, for the operations that we go into, and the training is very much tailored toward what we do.
And you focus on and correct me if I'm wrong, but do you focus on a lot of scenarios and maneuvers that have proven to be hazardous and or fatal?
Absolutely. So they'll take previous accidents and study them, which I think every pilot should do.
Yes.
And flight instructors should teach how to study accidents as well. So we take previous accidents, we look at them, we look at what went wrong. And most of the time, it's not the airplane braking that caused the accident, to your point. It's the bad decision that was made. Why do smart pilots do dumb things? So we look at the accident flight. We try to replicate some of the things that went into that without telling the pilot that that's what's happening, and watch the decision process and train the decision-making process throughout that training.
Diving deep into human factors and kind of dissecting it right there in the simulator.
It's the soft stuff that's getting people. And really, you want to train a pilot not to get into an airplane like you and I get into a car.
Right.
Those are the pilots who crash airplanes, are the ones who get into the airplane like we get into cars.
Routine.
We just get in, drive, and take for granted it's going to work. And when it doesn't, we're not prepared for it.
Right.
Absolutely.
Which that's kind of the beauty of the way the FAA has the biannual flight review structured. We can tailor it however we need to. They don't give us specifics. You have to do this. No, we as CFIs can figure out what makes this guy tick and where's his weaknesses and what do we need to focus on today. I love that.
And I think we need to leverage that more to our advantage. Because like you said, there's very little guidance on what exactly is supposed to be done. It's just 1 hour ground, 1 hour flight.
Right.
Every 24 calendar months. That's the bare minimum
Let's go
requirement.
get a hamburger. Oh, cool. Yeah.
Exactly. And unfortunately, I've seen that a lot.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of flight reviews are just kind of, let's go do some pattern work and a couple stalls. Okay, let's grab a burger and talk for an hour.
And it's not a check ride either. It should be viewed as this is recurrent training.
Right.
And it's really up to the student and the instructor together to decide they're ready to go flying again,
Right.
and tailor that lesson. I teach a lot of rusty pilots, and when they come back after 10 years, we kind of rule of thumb is 1 hour of flying for about every year you've been gone.
Right.
And that works out pretty good, but if I've had pilots who've been not flown for 30 years, I'm like, well, we may not take 30 hours, but
Right.
But it'll be a
we
couple
might.
of weeks.
Yeah.
We'll have multiple lessons.
It's going to take more than someone who flies every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So the kind of, I guess, closing question, now that we have insight, about the airlines and about how you like to run your training operation, and we talked about running things from the ACS and reviewing them on your own, I guess my final question is kind of a two-part question. How can we, as flight instructors, and how can we as pilots curb our fatal accident statistics? So if we really break down the numbers, and I should point out that in these statistics, 14 fatal accidents, part 121, 1,085 in Part 91. Part 91 did fly a lot more than Part 121, but if you break those down into percentages of the flight hours flown, Part 91 is 31 times more likely to have an accident than Part 121. And I want to know, us sitting up here on stage and then of course comments on the video and stuff like that, what can we as flight instructors and pilots do to curb that tragic statistic?
Don't crash.
We can start there.
So readiness
I'm
to
gonna
learn.
write that down.
I feel like readiness to learn is a big issue there. You need to get into the student's brain and let them know reasons, which NTSB brought it up, the stats and what they are. Why are people crashing? Get that in the student's brain. Hey, here's why people are crashing. Explain a story that just you can tell it gets in their head and they know it, they feel it. And then say, okay, now we're going to go out there and work on stalls today so that when the controls start to feel mushy, you can recognize that way ahead of time and you can push forward and fix your angle of attack and throw some power in, and it makes sense. Okay, now I'm ready to learn that. Let's go do that. Let's go tackle that. Let's get that going.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think studying accidents is a big thing because, one day I had a friend come to my door and he was wearing a medicine bag. And he started talking to me and he's off of work, he's not flying. And I said, what's that for? He's getting chemotherapy because he got some kind of cancer. And so what, as a human, do I want to know, how did you know you had it? What were your first signs? What did you see?
What are your symptoms? What
Right.
are the initial
And-
symptoms?
yeah.
Right, like the mushy flight.
Right.
What are the symptoms? So why? Because I don't want to get it. So we study accidents because I don't want to have that happen to me. And we're all human nature. We like to do that. We like to study accidents. We want to find out what happened to the other guy. It could happen to any of us. How do I see that and prevent it before it happens to me and keep it from happening?
In college, I had to take an NTSB accident reporting class, and in the beginning, I was like, oh, this is amazing. I love this. Towards the end, I was like, I don't know if I want to be a pilot anymore. I don't know about all this.
As a general rule, I think as GA pilots, we're doing great. Mostly, we're doing great. Most people like to study. The people viewing this video and this program and educating themselves, those aren't the problems. And so we're preaching to the choir in a way. And I think what we need to do as GA pilots and instructors is reach out to those who aren't in the choir and get them in, get them to start training, get them to start watching content and videos, obviously with not a blind eye toward what's accurate on YouTube and everything,
Right.
but getting into the training programs that get them some wings credit or get a check ride every year or two, something like that. But get them involved. Because like
Yeah.
I said, I think we're preaching to the choir. Many of the people who are watching this right now are probably not the ones who are going to crash.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, and when it really comes down to it, you're absolutely right. We're preaching to the people that are probably already on the same page
Right.
as we are.
They're
So,
agreeing with everything we're saying.
right, they're already agreeing with all of that stuff. So, yeah, I think it's super important. And as flight instructors, I think we need to be better mentors and kind of encourage recurrent training, make it cool again.
Right.
You know, like it's not just because you go get recurrent training every 6 months as a general aviation pilot, doesn't mean that you're deficient. Doesn't mean that you suck as a pilot.
Right.
That means that you owe it to your passengers. You owe it to the people on the ground. You owe it to yourself to get that training and stay proficient, not just current. You need to stay proficient. And
Everything's changing too. We're constantly introducing new stuff in the system and new avionics. You got to stay up with it. You can't just sit back and let it go.
you do.
Right, and the word proficiency is near and dear to my heart because my dad's series of books is called The Proficient Pilot, which is actually
Okay, yeah.
a great series of books. I'm not here pushing it, but I've taken that as my YouTube channel as well to promote aviation education and let that name live on in the future because I think proficiency, as you mentioned and emphasized earlier, is so very important. You can be current and not proficient. And so there's a big
Absolutely.
difference in understanding all that. So we should challenge each other to know more. We talk to each other as pilots, and I can impress you with some of the things I know and quiz each other. And then when, to trying to keep up with our friends and beat them and stump the dummy and all the games that we can play,
Yep.
I think that motivates others to try to come up with something that maybe you don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, the complacency factor is huge. And the hardest hurdle, the biggest hurdle with that is being very honest with ourselves. So when you're going out to the airplane and you're like, well, I did a pre-flight earlier, even though you ran to grab lunch, coming back to that airplane. And if you're starting to slip on just those things, on doing a more lazy pre-flight, well, the propeller's always been there. Or, just little things when you need to step back and take a moment and be like, am I becoming sloppy? Am I not chalking
Right.
the plane when I'm hand propping it because there's no camera rolling right now? Or, what kind of pilot am I becoming?
Right.
And having that really brutally honest conversation with yourself, I think it absolutely starts there. And then it also is being a good friend, being a good fellow aviator, and saying, hey, let's go work on this, and being very encouraging of what's going on here. Are we slipping? Are we starting to lose sight of that flight training environment that was so rooted into our everyday lives when we were working on that next rating, next endorsement, next certificate, and that starts to slip, and the complacency factor,
Complacency.
Yeah, you know who the safest pilot is?
the brand new private pilot.
Perhaps, but it's the one who has the FAA watching them fly. It's
Oh, there you go,
Who's
yeah.
the safest driver? The one with a cop in the rearview mirror.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you fly like you always have the FAA watching you,
Right.
and when there's a decision to be made, well, what decision would I make if the FAA was right here watching me?
Exactly.
That's the one you need to make.
I try to apply that mentality with cameras because I know how quick people on social media are to comment about
long
something
you
I
are?
did wrong. You're holding the yoke too hard, So I try to conduct every flight, whether I'm filming or not, as if I have 6 cameras pointed at me like I normally do. That's
good.
And that every minute of this flight is going to be published on social media, and rest assured the FAA is watching.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to be our motivator to be safe pilots. We should want to live. That should be the first thing.
Ramp cameras, with ADS-B, really there is a camera and a watchful eye on just about everything we
Big
do
brother's
now.
always
Your
watching.
data is
Yeah.
being recorded in one way or another.
Yeah.
So, and I think, kind of echoing what you said, so we talked about as flight instructors what we can do. We can encourage pilots to engage in more often recurrent training, practice the things that could possibly kill you. Really dive deeper into it as to why, and kind of shift our mentality. But as pilots, I think we need to kind of encourage everybody to do better. We need to sort of shift our culture and shift our mentality. I'm not calling for more regulations or tighter regulations on our recurrent training. Not necessarily.
More self-discipline.
More self-discipline,
among ourselves.
so that we don't
Absolutely.
have to have more regulation.
Yeah, and one of the things that I tout in every class that I teach or seminar I give or whatever, and I'm going to get it in here, is that we all have 2 speeds at which we can operate: slow or screw up. And one of the biggest common denominators in accidents, if you look at a lot of accidents, you'll see a big common denominator is that the pilot was rushing, either to do something himself or herself, or to comply with ATC.
Yeah.
And if you just take that out of the equation, I think you've gotten rid of 98% of the things that could possibly cause an accident. Is just slow down.
Man, I'm going to steal that.
Take it.
Slow or screw up.
2
I like
speeds.
It. I
Two
like
speeds. I got the website, 2speeds.com. Keep an eye on it.
2speeds.com. All right. Sounds great. Well, I think we just barely scratched the surface here. This is a topic that I am very, very passionate about, and these are just some stats and topics that we jotted down last night when we got into town. So this is just barely scratching the surface, in my opinion, when it comes to recurrent training in general aviation. We have an accident rate in general aviation that is atrocious. It's tragic. It's terrible. It shouldn't be happening.
Shoot for 0. And
We need to shoot for 0. Well, I appreciate all of y'all being on this chat. I think this is really important for us to continue talking about. I think this needs to be, we've already kind of started this conversation many times on social media and in different, I know several YouTube channels off the top of my head that have started this conversation. And it needs to be an ongoing conversation.
I agree. Let's keep it going. And the FAA I referred to earlier, the WINGS program that they have, which is a great program, says that pilots who, do a continuing, regular interval regime of training are less likely to get into accidents.
Yeah.
By
Now,
far.
do you think it's because of the training or because they are of the mindset that they want to keep learning? Or
I
they're
think it's the mindset and the mentality
Yeah.
that influences every decision that they make pre-flight, flight, and post-flight. and
Right.
we should all
100%.
strive for that.
100%. Yeah, I think what it really comes down to is letting our guard down. Don't let our egos drive. Oh, we don't need recurrent training. I got my flight review a year ago or whatever. Let that guard down. We're not above that.
Right.
We need to keep this stuff fresh on our mind. We need to have the mindset that we want to continue learning about it, continue studying accidents. Why did this airplane crash? Why did that happen? Why did this happen? And it'll ultimately make us safer.
Even as instructors, we're not trying to say that we don't have to study too. We're constantly studying. I'm sure you are watching
Yeah.
videos and studying every day too. So
Absolutely.
we are still recurring our own training as well. And
Absolutely.
if we're not, then we're going to drop downhill and it's not going to be good.
And I hope we're not going to see that, and I really hope that we can see those accident rates go downhill instead.
And
So.
curb the complacency, because it's the pilots who are complacent and have no fear. That's when it gets you, when you get bit.
Right.
And so I think the things that if a little bit of fear goes a long way with a pilot. You want to be a little bit afraid, not so much that you're skittish, but the point where I'm going to say, well, what if my engine quits? Where am I going to go?
A healthy respect.
It's a healthy respect,
Right.
more
Yeah.
than it is fear. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, again, I think we're just barely scratching on the surface. So in order to keep this video more digestible, we'll probably have to curb the conversation right there. But I want this to be a kind of a catalyst to begin that conversation in aviation and really keep it going, because I think it's important. I mean, the fate of general aviation and our own individual fates and our passengers, that's what it's holding. So I think it's super important. So anyways, if you liked this video, please like it, share it, comment, subscribe, all the good social media stuff. And this is a really important conversation. So I encourage you to take that to your hangar neighbors, to your buddies that you fly with, or your local aviation community, and apply it in your own flying, your own training. I think it's extremely important. Again, this channel is sponsored by so many amazing companies. Please go check them out down in the description. And I'm going to stick my plug in at the end of this episode, whether Dan likes it or not. I want you to stay happy, healthy, current, but most importantly, please stay proficient. We'll see you in the next episode right here in the hangar.